Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Criminal Justice Corner. Here at Criminal Justice Corner, we give you the real details surrounding the case, and just in case you find yourself in that same situation, we give you potential actionable advice so that you can potentially get yourself out of it. I am your host, Dr. Jennifer Matthews, and today I have with me Attorney Jonathan Steele. Attorney Jonathan Steele is a divorce lawyer. Don't we all need one of those? Attorney Jonathan Steele, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. First, thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Thank
I
you.
am a divorce lawyer. Hopefully, not everyone needs a divorce lawyer. Usually, when people call me, it's bad news, but
True.
it's pretty prevalent. So I'm here to help people through that. I've been doing it as a lawyer for about 12 years now, but I've been in family law starting as a clerk since I was 16. So a long time.
That is a very long time. Now, what made you want to even get started at such a young age in family law?
I don't know that I wanted to. I needed a summer job. I couldn't just, sit around the house and do nothing. And it was a family friend that was a divorce lawyer, and he hired me as a clerk, and I just sort of latched on, and I still work with or for that same person.
Oh, wow, that's huge. Not everybody does that in this day and age. We always hear about, I would say, in my parents, grandparents' day and age, where they get one job and they stay in it till retirement age. But to hear that you've done that, that's huge.
Yeah, I think it's rare. I don't know too many people in my field anyway that have been at it since high school. I think that's rare.
Totally, totally. Now, considering that you are a divorce attorney, I will say that you meet people in one of the most difficult times in their lives. So it cannot be a easy feeling that you get when you're dealing with new clients. What is something that somebody should know when they first meet you, when they're about to go through a divorce or they're thinking about going through a divorce? What is the first thing that you tell your clients?
I try to answer the questions that I know are coming to someone's mind, or even that they haven't come to mind. They get nervous. They're sitting in front of a lawyer. The lawyer's charging them a lot of money, and so they freeze up. And so they think they've asked all the questions that they should ask, and almost always they forgot things. And so I try to walk them through, here's what the common questions are, the ones you're forgetting to ask me, and here's the answers to them.
So what is the first common question you think that somebody like totally forgets and is like super crucial?
How much is this going to cost, and how long is it going to take? Those are the real operative ones, and people forget them. They sign up and they're walking out the door, and I say, do you want to find out what this is going to cost you or how long this is going to take? Oh yeah, those are good questions.
And I think those are like imperative questions. So what's a typical, we'll say ballpark, because we know every case is different. What is a ballpark divorce cost these days?
You hit it on the head. It is tough to ballpark it. I've seen divorce cases that have gone into the millions, and then I've seen cases that have been settled under $5,000. And the sweet spot
Okay.
around there is probably under 100,000, maybe in like the 20 to 50 range is probably the most common. Although we see some of the more expensive ones where I practice.
So is that fee what they pay you, or is that what they pay out to maybe a spouse or something?
That was what they would pay in legal fees, usually on both sides.
Wow. Okay. Now, the next question is ballpark, how long does it take?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on who is on the other side, both the lawyer and the party. Either one of them being difficult can make things take longer. I think
Hmm.
it's upwards of 90% of cases settle as opposed to going to trial, but a lot of them don't
Yeah.
settle until the eve of trial. It's when the rubber meets the road and where the lawyers finally sit down and look at, okay, this is how the case should end. In terms of like how long it usually lasts, if you settle, if you agree on everything very early on, you can be in the 1 to 3 month range. And then I think the more common is 1 to 2 years.
Wow. Now, does that time frame slide either way depending on if children are involved?
Yeah, so any of the, I don't want to say they're complicating factors because kids are great. I've got my own.
Absolutely.
But each little factor, whether you're dealing with like a closely held corporation, or you're trying to value a
Right.
business, or you have kids, things like that can add time, can add expense. Assuming it's not just an issue, but it's a litigated issue. If you come in and you're like, look, we're both good parents, we both love our kids, we can communicate, we can make decisions, we just don't want to be married anymore. that's pretty straightforward. You can make joint decision making, you can set out a parenting schedule, and then you enter that agreement, and then you fight about the money.
Okay. Now, what would you say is the most difficult part of your job as a divorce attorney?
It's a very emotional field. It's an emotional practice. And
Yes,
a lot of lawyers that I come across, they take on the emotions of their clients as opposed to
I can
keeping a
see that.
separation. And so
Yes.
they become emotional. They become unable to make good decisions that are rooted in logic.
Okay.
They just become a little bit too close to the client, a little bit too close to their cause. Not that you shouldn't care about your clients and care about their cases, but you are a representative of them and you're a professional and you need to keep some distance. Otherwise, your judgment's going to be skewed.
Now, do you sometimes see where, let's say, a husband and a wife, they come to divorce attorneys, both sides, they're represented, and they go through the process, they get going, and it's like 6 months down the line, and they're negotiating, and then all of a sudden they reconcile.
Yeah, I mean, it happens pretty often where at least somebody will come in and they'll say, let's pause the divorce. We want to give reconciliation a chance. We want to go into therapy or counseling, whatever that is. And then you put the divorce case on what's called the reconciliation calendar, which is basically just you're still in court, but you check in every 6 months as opposed to every month. So it's less costly to keep updating the court saying we don't really have an update. And then of the people that come in and ask to be put on that calendar, I would say at least half of them reconcile. But unfortunately, some of them come back. It's usually not a good sign of a healthy marriage when you're filing for divorce. So sometimes people try to reconcile, they dismiss their case, and then they come back.
Now, what percentage would you say of the divorces that you handle are amicable? And then what percentage would you say is more tumultuous?
My perspective is somewhat skewed. I work at one of the three large family law firms in the city of Chicago, and
Okay.
we are expensive. I'm not going to try to
Ooh.
sugarcoat that at all. We charge for our services. We do a good job, but we are expensive. And so,
Okay.
generally speaking, I think people that are amicable, people that are not trying to fight, they're just trying to get an easy divorce. Maybe there's no reason to say I'm going to spend $10,000 on a retainer for that kind of divorce. So sometimes some people view it as a waste of money. It isn't always, not to promote myself or my firm, but sometimes, you're trying to do it on the cheap and then you end up having to hire an expensive lawyer to try to undo something that was done before, and then you end up paying double. So it's not always the best logic, but I understand it. So, sometimes if you don't have a lot of money and you're going to spend money on a lawyer, it makes more sense if no agreement is imaginable, no agreement in sight, and you're buckling in and you're going to trial. Then you go and you hire the best lawyers you can afford. So I see a lot of tumultuous cases. I see a lot of acrimony. I see a lot of nasty, nasty
Mm.
fighting.
So you would say that it's better to hire a more seasoned attorney if you think you're going to lose, so to speak.
I would say it's always best to hire the best lawyer you can.
Okay.
Sometimes people make that decision solely based on the cost. And I get
Yes.
it. Cost is a real thing, and you're limited by what's in your bank account. But if you're scared off by the sticker shock right off the bat and you say, I can't afford $500 an hour, that's understandable. It's a lot of money. But what people aren't really considering is if I go to a lawyer that charges $200 an hour, but it takes that lawyer 3 times as long to do the same work, then you're coming out behind by not going the $500 an hour route. And also, if you end up with a $200 an hour lawyer and they drop the ball, they screw up your case, then you go to the $500 an hour lawyer and say, fix this, which is usually doable depending on exactly what was messed up. But again, you're paying double. So you're better off just biting the bullet, paying a little bit more up front, and getting a good outcome from the start.
Now, do you see that a lot? Do you get clients that have, maybe spent a little less and have let's say a order that was not what they really wanted and they settle for it and they come to you and they're like, please help me?
Yeah, pretty often, either somebody will come in and they'll say, here's the judgment that I got, undo this, appeal it, seek reconsideration, whatever you got to do, undo it. And that's hard. There's a deferential standard of review. A lot of times the appellate courts just say, we're not in a position to assess, credibility, so we're just going to go ahead and affirm this. So it's harder to come in at the 13th hour and try to undo something. And then I see a lot of people that come in who Either they tried to do it themselves up until a point, or they had a lawyer that was less experienced, and now they're on the eve of trial, and they say, now's the time to bring out the big guns, now's the time to spend the money. And so they'll come in on the eve of trial and say, I just need you to try my case, which is harder to do. You got to pretty much drop everything. It's all hands on deck to get ready for a trial. But
And that's expensive, right?
it is expensive to try a case. It's expensive to get ready to try a case. But because it happens so often, we have the staff for it, and we're experienced in doing that.
Because I was going to say, if one lawyer is $500 an hour and you're saying all hands on deck, I don't even want to know what that bill looks like.
The month or two, sometimes leading up to a trial, are the most expensive months. Sometimes they're more than the 10 months preceding. And then the month of the trial itself is pretty expensive. It depends, what your issues are, how long the trial is going to last. But those are the most expensive months, is getting everything ready. And, you've got paralegals running the clock there, getting documents ready. You've got sometimes associates that are doing, reviewing depositions and things like that. And then you've got a partner overseeing it all. So that last month is expensive.
Now, we know that in criminal cases, we know that there's a judge and we know that there's a jury. What is it in a divorce trial? Who's there?
At least in Illinois, you don't have any trials by jury. You only have a judge, and so they're the ones that preside over your trial. Sometimes in Cook County, where I primarily practice, you'll have a few different judges. You'll have a preliminary judge up until your trial, then you'll have a trial judge, and then you'll have a post-decree judge. So you may see a few different faces, but none of them are going to be jurors.
Now, is the reason for the multiple judges to prevent bias?
It's hard to know exactly why it's set up that way. I'm not a huge fan of the system. I think it would make more sense to have one judge throughout, because if you're trying to settle your case and you have a settlement conference with the first judge and they say, here's how I recommend it, settling your case, and here's how it will shake out. Somebody that doesn't like that recommendation is just going to say, thanks for your opinion. You're not the one that's going to be deciding it. So I need to convince the next judge, not you.
Yes, yes. So yeah, that's super interesting that there are three separate judges for one trial. So yeah, I totally get that. Now let's say you don't like the outcome and you've already went through the three judges. What can a person do?
You can seek reconsideration. You can ask the judge to basically just rethink or give a second look at what they did. There's some procedural hurdles there. You need to have new evidence. You need to have a change in the law or a misapplication of the law. And judges are human and they have egos. And to convince a judge you messed up is a hard thing to do. They don't often do it. They do on occasion, and then you saved yourself an appeal. If you can't convince them, you can go to the appellate court and you can ask the appellate court to take another look at it. But they too have a deferential standard, so they don't have the benefit of listening to testimony or watching physical indicators of defensiveness during testimony. So they have black and white text on paper. That's all they can look at. And so they very often affirm trial courts and more rarely will reverse a trial court.
Now, prior to a man and a woman getting married, what is the best way for them to go into the marriage so that they can do their due diligence to try to protect themselves if, heaven forbid, they have to get a divorce? What would be the best advice for them? Should they get a prenup? Should they put their assets in trust? What would be the best remedy for them going into the marriage?
So I'd say two things. One, a prenup is a great idea. There's a misconception around who it's for and what it accomplishes, and a lot of people think, I don't have a lot of money, so I don't need a prenup.
Mm-hmm.
It is a misconception because, at least in Illinois and in a lot of states, if you come into your marriage with money, generally speaking, when you leave your marriage through a divorce, that money is yours, whether you had a prenup or not. That's your non-marital property. You had it before you got married. Now, I say generally speaking because there are caveats. You can commingle your money with marital money and then you've got a problem. So that leads to the second point after having a prenup would be, if you are getting married and you have money going into it, keep it separated. Don't commingle it. Don't put your paychecks during your marriage into that same account where you had your money from before you got married, because you want to be able to say it was always separate.
So, okay, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think that's an unpopular opinion, but I agree with that. What about property? going into the marriage. What do you say to that?
It's the same. Real estate, any sort of non-cash asset is the same. If you it's treated the same, it's your non-marital property. There are nuances to it. If you come into a marriage and you own a home and during the marriage you're making mortgage payments on that home from your income, then your spouse may have an argument that yes, it's your non-marital property, but you used marital funds to service the loan, and so therefore I want the marital estate to be reimbursed for all those mortgage payments. So it can be nuanced. A lot of times judges won't buy into that argument. They'll say, you were otherwise compensated. You had a place to live, so we're not going to reimburse the marital estate for mortgage payments.
But what about if the husband and wife buy a home together? How should that be? Like, because normally both names are on the property. What is about that?
The most common fact pattern you'll see is during the marriage, the couple buys real estate, and
Hmm.
the titling alone isn't an indicator of whether it's marital or non-marital. It's just when it was purchased. So there's a presumption in Illinois that any property acquired during the marriage is marital. You can rebut the
Okay.
presumption a few different ways, but the title alone isn't dispositive. It's just about when you purchased it. And then again, there's nuance. If you purchased a home during the marriage, but the funds that you used to put down came from non-marital money or it came from the sale of your home prior, there's an argument that it's non-marital. It's one of the almost everything is it depends, and that's a frustrating answer for clients, but
Yeah.
it does depend usually.
So literally every client that you get, you're literally, it's like a tree. I would say that. They come in and they're the tree, and then they have a question and then it branches off. Then they have another question and it branches off because it all depends.
And then the biggest variable there is the judge. So, you can tell a client all day, if the law is followed, here's what will
Yeah.
happen. But then you walk into a courtroom and the judge is human and they could be having a bad day or they could have gone through their own divorce or who
Yeah.
knows what motivates them, and they don't follow the law. So
Yep.
that's the tough thing to try to keep track of and try to advise clients about, because it's almost anyone's guess what that judge is going to do on that day.
And then what's really weird, because I'm in Illinois as well, what's really weird, you can have back to back cases. Same judge, and they'll rule totally different in both cases.
Yep, that happens pretty often. I had a day last week where I had two hearings in the same day in front of the same judge on different cases, but it was the same issue. I was just on one side in one and on the other side in the other. So it happens, and it's interesting.
And you're just like, did that really just happen? Judge, were you listening?
You ruled in my favor before, but you were wrong. So now rule in my favor now again.
Exactly. And then keep in mind, if you ask them to reconsider, their ego is going to come into play, and then they're going to really not like you the next time you come into their courtroom. So you're really not going to get what you want. So it's that balancing game that you have to play with them. And then there are only so many divorce judges in Illinois, in Cook County. So then you have to play that game too, because you can't get on the bad side of all of them. So then what?
It's tough. Certainly as a lawyer, you try to keep a good rapport with all of the judges for that very
Absolutely.
reason. If you're
Yeah.
one of these bull in a china shop kind of lawyers that yells at judges and tells them they're stupid, you're screwed the next time you're in front of them. So it's difficult as a party, but it's even more so as a lawyer to try to maintain a good rapport.
Absolutely, because they don't forget. And I'm sure they have like a little journal or something, and they write your name down and they write down that little instance, and they're going to remember, and they're going to be like, oh, I remember this guy. I'm not going to give him what he wants.
And they talk, just like lawyers gossip
Oh,
about
yeah.
judges gossip
Yeah.
about lawyers. So the one time you say, I'm going to fudge the facts a little bit, I'm going to make an argument that's not really rooted in anything, other judges are going to find out about that very
And they'll
quickly.
remember that. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
use it against you, because then they'll use it against you by saying, don't listen to anything he says because he's not credible. And then that doesn't help you in any of your cases, because now they'll be like, I don't believe him. We'll give the other side what they want, even if the other side is not warranted that. Now you look like the bad guy. And
That's
your
right.
clients are like, I'm not hiring that guy again, or I'm not going to pay that guy. I'm going to get somebody else.
That's right. You get one reputation, and all it takes is one misstatement to one judge, and your reputation's gone.
Absolutely. I am a former sheriff, worked in Cook County courthouses for 11 and a half years, and I think I've seen just about everything. So I completely understand where you're coming from. I worked in the Daily Center, I worked in 26th Street, I worked all the different courthouses, and nothing amazes me anymore. And you'd be surprised. And like you said, they talk, they're friends, they go to lunch, they play golf, they do all kinds of things together. They go to conventions, conferences, and so there's no like escaping the little web that they have with each other.
That's right, for sure.
So, as we wrap up, what is some advice that you can give the listeners that they can take away and say, hey, I was listening to this podcast and this attorney gave me some really good advice?
I think I'd just circle back to try to avoid the sticker shock making the decision for you, because there's a lawyer for every price range, but price can't be the only determining factor. If you end up with that $200 an hour lawyer and they've never tried a divorce case, maybe you're better off finding a $300 an hour lawyer, something in between, somebody that has tried a case before. So, cost is important. It's unavoidable. It's a reality of life, but so are the outcomes that come out of court proceedings. And so you have to sort of try to balance that the best you can.
Excellent, excellent. Now, where can they find you? What is the name of your law firm? How can they reach you?
I work at Bierman Law. You can find me on the website, biermanlaw.com. And, we have 60 of us here that do almost nothing but divorce. So we're pretty familiar with that field.
So you just do divorce and no longer family law, just divorce now?
No, we do divorce, paternity cases, orders of protection, stalking orders, anything that's sort of related to domestic, we'll do that.
Awesome, awesome. And primarily Cook County, correct?
I am primarily in Cook County. We have another office in Bannockburn that serves Lake County, but we also do all the collar counties. Tomorrow, somehow, I'm expected to be in Lake County in the morning, Kane County in the afternoon, and then make my way back to Cook. So we're all over.
I hope you can make that because I recently heard of a attorney that had to be in two counties at the same time and she got jailed for that. So I hope you can make that.
One's in the morning, one's in the afternoon, so I should be okay, but it'll be a stressful day, I think.
I think, and you know what? Chicago traffic. So good luck with that.
I like to Uber to these counties. I get to sit in the back and work and not deal with, road rage. That's tough.
I think that's an educated way to handle your day. And guess what? It will relieve some of that stress that you will be under in the traffic.
I think so. I could sit behind the wheel and just get really aggravated and not work, and that's not the way I like to start the day.
I think that's so much better because, like you said, you get to work, you get to kind of woo-saw on your way there, and then the same to the next location. I think that'll be way better because you need that energy for the courtroom.
That's right. And sometimes it's just, even if I'm not working, it's just let me turn my brain off for an hour and not have to worry about like I'm going to crash into the car in front of me because I turned my brain off.
Exactly. And maybe even close your eyes because again, you need that energy. It's a lot to be a lawyer, to have all those cases, to do all of the stuff that comes with it, and to be prepped for when you get there because now you got to do that hustle and bustle, I call it. Run into the courtroom, talking to your client. Okay, let's go over this, let's go over that, and don't forget this and don't forget that. It's a lot.
Sure is.
It's a stressful job that you have. So I commend you for that because I went to law school and I tell you, it was not my jam.
It's not for everybody. At some point there was color in my hair. It's gone. It is a stressful job.
Yeah, I get it. I was like, this is not for me. Let me decide to do something else. So hats off to you. Keep fighting the good fight because we can't all do that. So somebody has to do it. And you've been doing it since 16. That's huge. Huge. How much longer do you plan to do this?
For the foreseeable future. I definitely want to be a lawyer for as long as I can. Whether I stay in divorce or not remains to be seen, but I do like being a lawyer. So until I can't practice well anymore, I think I'll continue to practice.
Do you have aspirations of being a judge?
No, for a number of reasons, I don't think I would be a judge.
Okay, and that's okay too. That's okay too. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and you know that that's your strength, and that's okay.
I think it's important to stay in your lane, know what you're good at, know what you're not good at, and I don't think I would make for the best judge.
And that's okay. That's what I said. We all know our strengths and our weaknesses. So I agree with that. So that's okay. So for our listeners, I want to thank you so much for listening. I would encourage you to like, subscribe, and share. Please leave a comment below if you have enjoyed this episode. Tell us what you think and if you would like more like this. And please watch us on the next episode of Criminal Justice Corner. Thank you.
Thank you.